Bonjour à toutes et à tous.
Hello, everyone. My name is Viviane Poupon. I am the CEO of Brain Canada, and I will be pleased to moderate our conversation today. I would like to welcome you to this conversation on travel and neurocognitive disorders, a very current subject as we are getting close to the holiday season where people will travel a lot. So it's a very important topic for many people with neurocognitive disorders, for caregivers and researchers. This year, the Vancouver International Airport was again awarded a prize from the community of people with neurocognitive disorders because of its support to help them travel. It reminds us that that same year, we've heard a lot of stories about a lot of disabled people who were treated poorly by airline companies in Canada. We do have in Great Britain an organization that help people with neurocognitive disorders travel. So before opening the floor to our panelists, I have some information to share with you. So this discussion is brought to you by Brain Canada in partnership with the Alzheimer Society of Canada. To find out more about these two organizations, I encourage you to consult the chat box where you found the links to our webinar. This session is presented in French with simultaneous interpretation in English. To select a language, click on the interpretation button at the bottom of the screen, then choose the language of your choice. You will also notice that survey questions will appear occasionally on your screen during the session to help us determine whether we're meeting your needs. So please do not hesitate to let us know what you think during the conversation. This session is being recorded and will be presented on YouTube and Alzheimer.ca in the coming days. Finally, it's a discussion, so the chat box is open and supervised in case you'd like to just say hi or tell us about your experiences or resources that might be useful to other participants. If you have any questions for our panel, please send them via the Q&A function on your Zoom, and we will do our best to answer them towards the end of our hour together. Questions that remain unanswered by the end of the meeting will be followed up with by email in the coming days. I speak to you from the traditional land of the Kenyan Kehaga people, a site historically known as a place of gathering and exchange between nations. We want to express our respect and gratitude for Indigenous elders who populated our past, who are with us today, and who will be with us in the future. And we pledge to move forward in a spirit of partnership, collaboration, and reconciliation. It is now my pleasure to introduce the panelists taking part in today's discussion. They all bring an important perspective to this topic. So I would like to extend a warm welcome to Shalisa Capaday, who is a first link nurse for the Alzheimer Society of Suroît. Ms. Capaday often talks about mental health and neurocognitive disorders, among other subjects. Our second panelist today is Linda Garcia, Professor Emeritus at the Interdisciplinary School of Health Sciences at the University of Ottawa. Hello, Ms. Garcia. She does research on accessibility for people with neurocognitive disorders in Canadian airports, and she will share with us today the results of her research. Our third panelist today is Guylaine Thériault. She is a regional development advisor supports project funding. She deals with many issues, and she will share with us her experience, her point of view on the issue of travel. Finally, we have with us Claire Webster, who's the founder and president of Caregiver Crosswalk, the She has also been a caregiver and partner of a person with Alzheimer's. So she will share her experience with us during the conversation that we'll have today. I would like to thank you all for participating, and I would like to extend a warm welcome to you. To start the discussion, I would like to ask a simple but important question. What do you think Canadians should know about travel and neurocognitive disorders? We'll start with Shalisa. Thank you very much, Dr. Poupon. I'm pleased to be here. First off, today I'd like to start with a few recommendations that I give my clients on a regular basis. So recommendations that I have developed over my years in the Alzheimer Society of Suroît. So it's not impossible for someone with light neurocognitive disorder to travel on their own. My grandma did that over a few years ago. So what I would recommend first and foremost, whether you have a neurocognitive trouble or not, is to avoid traveling alone. There's always stress associated with traveling alone, especially abroad. And with changes incurred that are due to neurocognitive disorders, this presents with added difficulties and challenges. So traveling with somebody else is safer. Generally speaking, if you need help with anything, even when you're in a couple, I suggest that you travel as a group. So if the person who has a neurocognitive disorder needs help, more than one person can help, and everybody can enjoy their vacation. So that's my first recommendation. There's another recommendation that I'd like to share with you. Whether you have doubts or not, sometimes people want to travel just to visit family, but sometimes even if their diagnosis is changing, people are wondering how they can best prepare for travel. So the best way to get prepared is to experiment by doing a short-term stay, a couple of hours away from your place. This will help you deal with not being in your environment. When you don't have your natural caregiver at hand, are you experiencing more stress, more anxiety? How are you dealing with traffic? Even myself, when I stay in a car for more than an hour, I can feel anxiety. I'm becoming less patient. So all of this is good to know ahead of time because it can give you information about some adaptations that you can make to your travel plans. And if you don't enjoy it as much as you thought you would after 2 days, that gives you some insight about how you deal with traveling. If you're getting a bit tired after a few days, maybe you can tell that a shorter term stay would be more beneficial for you. Or maybe when you travel closer to home, maybe things are way easier because you know you can come back anytime. So it gives more flexibility to travel locally. And if you get lost, if you get disoriented, then it's way easier to deal with it when you're closer to your family, closer to your known environment. So if you want to travel alone, there are different ways of doing it. You can travel as a group, with a partner, with family members, with a group, with friends. I even know of people who hired someone to accompany them on a trip. So if something happened, people with the person with neurocognitive disorder can still enjoy their vacation. So that's a few of the recommendations I can give. Claire, you have a first-hand experience with that. So how do you react to Shalisa's recommendations? Would you like to add anything to that? Thanks for having me today. It's a question that's often asked by natural caregivers. So I think at the beginning we need to be able to assess all that the person can still do. So the person needs to be encouraged. But we have to realize that there are still some unexpected events that can happen. So sometimes people ask me if it's okay to leave for 2 weeks or a month. And oftentimes what I say is that it's always a good idea to have a plan B. So maybe you're planning to go for 2 weeks, but do you have any options of coming back sooner? Can you change your flight tickets? Can you cancel your reservations if something do not go as planned? So what I see sometimes is that family members, families have traditions. Every year we wanted to go to such and such place because that's what we used to do before. But what we don't realize is that maybe the person with neurocognitive disorder is not here anymore 100%. So there's no need to put pressure on this person to travel. So you have to adjust to the person's condition. And you have to understand that neurocognitive disorders can create disorientation and confusion. So what I experienced with my mother is that overstimulation every time she would go to an airport, a hospital, a shopping mall, she would become overstimulated, and this had an impact on the person's routine. So if you're traveling abroad, like out of province or internationally, you have to make sure that you have access to proper healthcare if anything happens. Are you well prepared for that? And most importantly, because I want to leave my colleagues talk about it later, is to recognize our own limits as a natural caregiver. Do we have the energy to travel with the person with neurocognitive disorder? Because it's going to take emotional patience, it's going to take physical abilities if the person cannot move as much as she would like, as he or she would like. So we have to assess whether, as a natural caregiver, we have what it takes to do that trip. Yes, you have to listen to yourself as a natural caregiver and listen to the needs of the person that you're supporting. Those are key aspects. Linda, Guylaine, so maybe Linda, you can go ahead. Maybe you would like to add something to this fascinating conversation. Yeah, I think a lot of things have been covered for people with neurocognitive disorders who want to travel. That's also the findings that come out of our research, but there's also other players, people who assist you at the airport, etc. And they need to know about your needs. So there's different ways of making sure of that. So of course you can disclose a diagnosis if you are willing to do that, but you don't have to do that. Sometimes if you have neurocognitive disorders, your diagnosis is not clearly established. So in addition to doing short-term local travels, you need to establish a list of your needs. If you know you need a quiet space, you need somebody to walk with you to the door of the to get on the plane. People who work in airports need that they need to be aware of passengers' needs. So that's something that I would add to the list of recommendations provided. Guylaine, what would you add? Thank you very much. In fact, traveling with a person with neurocognitive disorders requires, on the part of the natural caregiver, good preparation. So most importantly, you need to plan your travel ahead of time. I fully agree with everything that was said before. I would add, though, that so I like the idea of having a plan B because that's what it takes, and even sometimes a plan C, right? So when you're planning to go on a trip, plan for short trips that will help you identify how it will go. If you want to travel longer term, you have to keep in mind that the person with neurocognitive disorders will have disorientation issues, will have difficulty communicating because of anxiety, because of stress, because of being in an unknown environment where the person doesn't recognize the sound, the smells, or an environment where there's stimulation that triggers anxiety in these people. And this anxiety will not always be able to deal with because it's going to impact the natural caregiver. I've always been of the opinion that if you are accompanying a person with neurocognitive disorders, you have to be able to say it in a discreet manner, whether it is with a little card saying that the person that I'm with has neurocognitive disorders, because it allows people to understand your needs and understand your special circumstances. And people are understanding of the fact that if you are with a person with Alzheimer's disease, avoids judgment, and people may make some remarks or comments that are difficult to deal with and to accept. So that's why it's quite important to prepare ahead of time, and that's why we talk a lot about neurocognitive disorders. People are very aware now of those challenges, but when you travel with someone, that's a very important aspect to take into account. So I think when you identify it and when you need help, people will provide that help. If you're at an airport and you realize that somebody with neurocognitive disorder becomes overly agitated, even angry, confused, being able to rely on support from others will assist the natural caregiver in their endeavors, because oftentimes natural caregivers do that to please the person who wants to travel. We've always been to Florida every winter. It was always fun, so we need to keep going there, but maybe it's not as true as it used to be anymore. So you can also prepare for that by showing pictures to the person that you are accompanying. So I think this is all part of good preparation and adaptation. And you have to be prepared for the fact that it may not such a restful vacation. But I think we need to take advantage of every single moment. And when the person is tired, we need to take time for the person to rest, go to places that you and the person you're traveling with appreciates. So that's it for my recommendations. Thank you, Guylaine. I think what you said is very important. I think it's important to keep working on this connection by doing things that are pleasant for everyone, the natural caregiver, and for the person with the neurocognitive disorder. So I think it is quite important. I would like to move on to another type of question. So what surprised you lately in your research on this issue of traveling with neurocognitive disorders? So I would like to ask Linda first. So we are in the middle of a research project on that very issue right now. I was pleasantly surprised by the approach and the interest that our colleagues had around the table. So we had a round table with Air Canada, WestJet, air controllers, representatives from AXTA, from CATSA rather. We had representatives of the community of people with neurocognitive disorders and people who advocate for disabled people. So, and we also had somebody from Transport Canada, and we were able as a group to identify the various hurdles and how they could be overcome. Then we visited several airports, and we are now at the phase where we're having interviews. So we visited 10 airports across Canada to identify their various programs available for people with neurocognitive disorders. We also talked about the United Kingdom, where a lot of good things are done there. And and there's also a lot of interesting projects and promising things going on in Australia. At some point, we thought that somebody in a wheelchair could not travel anymore. At some point, we thought that it would be completely impossible for people in wheelchairs. So we know it's not. I think it's still a complicated thing, but it's possible, and we need to work with the people who provide those services. So first of all, it is extremely complex. People who manage airports, they're not the same people who manage airlines, who operate the various stores and services around the airport. So it's a very complex fabric. I was surprised by the level of interest from stakeholders, and they wanted to know about what others do. Like I said, they need to have information about the needs of people with neurocognitive disorders, because those types of disorders are not necessarily on the radar of everyone. So we do have some homework to do to make sure that we communicate those needs. So I am asking you all to share experiences, and if you want to share anything to help us better understand the needs of people with neurocognitive disorders, please send me an email directly at the University of Ottawa so we can talk about that. It is an international and domestic issue, because if everything is nice and good in Montreal and you arrive in Vancouver and it's a nightmare, well, that can be an issue. So there are various programs available that take into account other disorders like autism, for example. Airports have programs that are designed for people with autism that could be useful for people with neurocognitive disorders. So best practices like that can be shared. There is also a disclosure program. Not everybody is willing to disclose their diagnosis of dementia or of a neurocognitive disorder. So we have to find a way to work with other stakeholders to do that in a discreet and subtle manner. Maybe you can wear a little button with the Sunflower program at the Vancouver airport that identifies you as a supporter of this program. So people who need support, people with neurocognitive disorders or traveling with someone with such disorders, can turn to me for support, or the person themselves can wear a special sign that identify them as a person to whom you can turn for help. So I was very surprised, I must say, by how people are willing to adapt to the needs of people with neurocognitive disorders. Once we have identified all of the issues in terms of disclosure, awareness, communication, staff training, all of that, we will need people with neurocognitive disorders and natural caregivers to tell us what works, what doesn't, and what needs to be changed. Thank you so much for your insight. Claire, what were you surprised by recently in your research? I am not a researcher. I am more a field worker. I do work with natural caregivers. So, like I said in my answer to the first question, the idea of traveling with someone with neurocognitive disorders is a great source of stress for caregivers. That's a reality. It also causes a lot of grief, because throughout the progression of the disease, we know it affects the person from a cognitive aspect, but also from a physical aspect, and people cannot do what they used to do before, and this causes people to grieve. Families grieve that process, because you always used to go play golf every winter, so it causes a lot of grief. And also it results in a feeling of guilt for natural caregivers, because they tend to think that they need to keep trying as hard as they can, and sometimes their emotions disrupt reality, and they distort reality. So maybe that puts too much pressure. Sometimes family members put too much pressure for the person with a neurocognitive disorder to travel, even though that person is not able to travel. I worked with a woman whose dad had Alzheimer's, and every summer he would go to his cottage in New Brunswick. For her, she had to take her dad for a week at the cottage, but he wasn't asking for it. So in the end, she decided to take her dad there. And what happened? They were able to get there, but he didn't even realize he had a cottage. They were by the sea. So she was always watching him to make sure that he wouldn't go in the water, because he would get up at night and take walks. So I think what is important for people like her or other family members is to take one last vacation as part of the grieving process, to validate that it is no longer an option, if you will. So if the person is still able to travel, I think it's a good idea of trying, but sometimes it's a good way of starting the grieving process to make them realize that it won't be a possibility anymore. So that's the way I see it with families. Absolutely. Guylaine, I find this conversation very interesting. When I started doing research, there are two things that came out, two memories. I remembered a couple where the lady took care of her spouse for 16 years, and they went camping for a long time. It's something that they used to do before the onset of the disease, and that they kept doing during the disease, after the onset. And I kept asking questions. How do you do that? How do you make sure that you can do it in a safe way? And what she answered was that it was a routine. There was no source of overstimulation for her. It was business as usual, pretty much. The man was pleased with the experience, and they stopped doing that maybe 5 years before he passed away. So I was very surprised by that, because I think that she found a way to adapt her travel plans to her husband's condition. I have another story. A man was to move with his spouse, and he always told me that it took a lot of patience, because I wanted her, I want her to take part in the process, to prepare the luggage and stuff. And the person with the neurocognitive disorder felt able to pack up her suitcase, but then everything that was in the suitcase was put back in the closet. So it didn't really make sense. It takes a lot of patience to be able to do that. And just like Claire and Linda said, it is a constant learning process. You have to strive to evolve step by step. So when you travel, you have to be ready for any possibility. You have to have realistic expectations. You can sometimes be discouraged, but you can also experience some amazing moments. It's not all negative. There can be a lot of positive experiences. So we're just on the verge of the holiday season, and people will want to travel. But if, for example, for a person, having too many children around them is a source of overstimulation, maybe you can tell your family members that you need to adapt. Let's say Roger, for example, after 2 hours gets very tired, so maybe come and visit him in small groups instead of having family reunions as a large group. Maybe we should support him. And I think natural caregivers are very grateful for that, when their family, when the people around them respect that. There are a lot of people with neurocognitive disorders. We're all impacted by this. We all know of someone who has a neurocognitive disorder in our families or in our social spheres. So it is something that needs to be worked on. Unfortunately, neurocognitive disorders can be developed by anyone. So I think it's high time that we started finding ways of being accommodating, whether in Canada or internationally, so that we can experience good moments and so we don't stay isolated. When I think about airports, when people embark on a plane, flight attendants need to have training on that. Staff need to be able to understand those disorders. Then we realized that a lot of people have people with neurocognitive disorders in their family. So I think we'll finally be able to adjust, but I think we have to work hard to that end. Before moving on to Shalisa, I see that Aya made a very good suggestion in the comment section. When there's a stressful situation and the person with a neurocognitive disorder starts being agitated, this creates fear, not necessarily fear of the people and staff, but also fear in people, among people traveling with the person with neurocognitive disorders. If someone's taking a video, for example, who reacts out of curiosity without supporting, that's something that will add to the stress created by the situation. So the suggestion is to provide training to people who work in airlines, airports, who are going to be called upon to deal with those types of situations, but also to advise regular people, regular travelers who are not necessarily familiar with the kind of situation that's happening before their eyes. Because I think we're all going to have to experience that at some point in our lifetimes. It is something that is becoming more and more unavoidable. So it's not something that's positive for the airline company. It's something that would benefit everyone. So Shalisa, you have the floor. I don't think your mic is turned on, Shalisa. Here I am, sorry. In terms of what surprised me in my research, doing research for this meeting today, I saw the existence of Dementia Adventure. So I don't think we had that much progress here because we do have travel agencies that will organize travel for seniors. But for a travel agency to specialize in travel for people with dementia, I think that's quite outstanding. So we were talking about the fact that some environments were more welcoming. So in Great Britain, they have airports with designated spaces for people with dementia. I think that's quite interesting. But I wanted to talk about the various destinations that you might want to consider. Last winter, I know a family that went to a hotel, a resort in the south, and the resort was able to provide a person, a staff member, to accompany the lady with neurocognitive disorder down there without putting a strain on family members. Some people also want to experiment before traveling abroad. If you go shopping, for example, you can realize that you don't like big crowds, or maybe you can go to a hotel or to an Airbnb where you have your personal space when you need to have a retreat with your little kitchen and all that stuff. Personal space to help you get your thoughts together. I think that could be a viable option for someone with neurocognitive disorder. But I think that resorts are more structured. You don't need to go on excursions and things like that. So in resorts, there's activities that are all on the premises. So if the person just wants to go to the beach, I mean, that's an option. Or you can also opt for an Airbnb. There's not only one format. Sometimes you can have another family sharing the house, for example, that can be there to support you. So that's one last point I'd like to raise. There's an increasing number of people who are diagnosed right after the onset of the disorder. But sometimes we tend to think about the needs of natural caregivers because the needs of people with dementia keep changing. So even in a family, I think you need to be comfortable to talk about it and to talk about the changing needs of natural caregivers and of the person with a neurocognitive disorder. Talk about your concerns and plan accordingly. So I think that's a point that needs to be raised. So even if you travel as a group, you need to involve the person as much as possible, even if it's only to share concerns. So a person that do not show a lot of symptoms can realize that some subjects do not have to be a taboo anymore. So people need to be informed of what's realistic, and they need to have realistic expectations. So it's always a good thing to be informed. For the last question, we talked about that. We talked about what happened in Great Britain, but concretely, what should the governments or other authorities, like airports, for example, what can they do about travel and neurocognitive disorders? And we'll start with Claire. So we often talk about air transport companies, but there are people who travel by car, by bus, by train. And as Guylaine mentioned earlier, training is key. Training needs to be provided for all staff who work in hotels, in restaurants. People talk about dementia-friendly cities because there's still a lot of confusion and misunderstandings about the early signs of the disease. People think that neurocognitive disorders are just a lack of memory or loss of memory, but it can start with behavioral issues, personality disorders, mood swings. So sometimes staff can be led to believe that somebody's intoxicated or drank too much, or so there's a lot of information to be given out there to raise staff awareness to the signs of dementia and the symptoms. Somebody mentioned anosognosia. It's a word that I often use. It means that a person who has neurocognitive disorders does not recognize himself or herself as a person with issues. My mom was like that. She denied that she had neurocognitive disorders and that she was affected by it. So this leads people to exercise poor judgment. So we need to provide training on how to develop a relation with somebody in that situation and how to recognize those signs and symptoms. So it's a very complex issue. Training needs to be provided about how to communicate. So not only how to recognize and identify symptoms and how to communicate with the person and how to communicate with natural caregivers by showing empathy, because natural caregivers are already under a lot of stress when they do those trips and when they travel with a person with neurocognitive disorders. So they need to benefit from empathy. So I will let my colleagues talk. Maybe Guylaine? I could not agree more. I think all is based on information and knowledge. I think we need to know and understand the disorder through the eyes of natural caregivers and through the eyes of the patient. So those are two very important aspects, because a person who does not recognize himself or herself as a person with neurocognitive disorders is still happy with his or her life. So there's a positive aspect to that, because there's all other situations where people are angry or sad. So I think we need to be prepared to all of those situations, because we tend to forget that we're dealing with people. We're not dealing to a disease or a disorder. We're dealing with people. And understanding fully neurocognitive disorders allows everybody to act accordingly, and it takes training for that. But like you said, staff in restaurants, in hotels, in travel agencies, it would be nice to have a travel agency just like they have in the United Kingdom for people with neurocognitive disorders who want to travel. But I think it applies everywhere, whether you go grocery shopping or go to the pharmacy. Doesn't matter. Anywhere you go, there needs to be empathy. I like that expression. There needs to be empathy for the people who are natural caregivers, or for the person with the neurocognitive disorder. People who are often uncomfortable because they don't know how to deal with a very enthusiastic person with neurocognitive disorder. So we need to read documents, seek training with organizations that provide such training. I think for me, it's the most important thing. I think we need to raise awareness around us. And when you tell someone that your spouse has Alzheimer's, people are compassionate. They empathize because they are increasingly aware of what it means. And oftentimes they will ask you how they can be of help. And you should not be ashamed of asking for help, I think, when you need it. Absolutely, Guylaine. Shalisa, do you want to add something? I don't want to go over what was said before. I think that's essential information. But today in airports, we have all of the forms available. If you have a special need, you can mention it. But then the need needs to be met. It's one thing to know about the need. So on this point, there's a lot of documentation available online. So two things about that. First, among support organizations and on articles, things are often seen through the eyes of the natural caregiver. So we need to focus more on the person with the neurocognitive disorder. Then in terms of accessibility, so it's one thing for those procedures to be available, but do I, as a normal person, have the ability to identify, to find what I'm looking for? Sometimes things are difficult to find and to access. So we talked about the Sunflower program at the Vancouver airport and the like. And oftentimes we talk about disabled people or people with deficiencies. So there's still a lot of work to be done. It's only 50% of people who are diagnosed at the beginning of right after the onset of the disease. So people do not necessarily realize that those things can apply to them because they have Alzheimer's. Even for tax credits, not everybody is claiming the tax credits that they're entitled to because of this problem of recognizing that you are a person with a neurocognitive disorder. We need to make things accessible so that people can realize that they can receive a benefit or receive support in a museum or in an airport. So these people do not need to be considered disabled people, but they need to be considered as people with specific health needs. They need maybe physical adaptations or cognitive adaptations. Linda, in light of your research and the people you worked with, do you have any other recommendations? What should governments and authorities take into account? So we talk a lot about awareness and raising public awareness about the needs of people with neurocognitive disorders and caregivers. So I'm 100% for training programs. I fully agree with my colleagues, but to add to what Shalisa said about a person who can still travel and who realizes one day that he or she has unexpected reactions, governments need to be aware of the issues experienced by people, but also people need to be open to talk about it. And we talked about a grieving process earlier. Do you need to do that trip? Do you need to travel? But if you feel like doing it, well, you need to take ownership for it. And you need to make sure that you inform the people around you and to make sure that they have appropriate training. Because what was the most significant around the table was that the various stakeholders said that it was very important for them to listen to the stories of people. When I check a box with a disabled person, I show up with a wheelchair for that person, whereas that's not what they're needing. So something else that governments need to do is to standardize terminology and the language. Shalisa quickly mentioned that when she referred to disabilities and deficiencies, but if you take a look at documents on programs, there are programs referred to as escort programs, and I'm not even kidding. So that's how it's called. So I think there needs to be standardization. Where can you access those programs? What's the name of those programs? Who's in charge? So it's super hard to find information. It's all over the place. And everybody uses different terms. So it's not just here in Canada, but also everywhere internationally. So we need that standardization. I think those are key points. Time is flying. I thank you for raising all of those very interesting points. I would also like to give the audience the opportunity to ask us questions. If you want me to see your questions, please type them in the chat box. There's a common theme that keeps coming back. It's 3 people asking the same questions. So air transport is not the only option, but it's probably the mode of transport that causes the most stress because it's complex. It involves a lot of players. So how can I make sure that the person that I'm traveling with will embark on the plane and not miss the flight? So we talked about existing resources, but is there advice? Is there information that needs to be taken into account to make sure that the person can get on the flight? First off, I think you really need to understand the needs of a specific person. So if you bring someone at the airport and the person is nervous about getting on the plane, for me it's a sign that the person has a disorder. And if the person has a diagnosis, it means that there is limited acceptance of the diagnosis and the circumstances. you have to really understand the limits of the person. I saw who asked the question, and I think we need to take the time ahead of time before traveling. Let's say if you want to go to another province, what are the different options, the different modes of transport that you can use? Can you take the train? Can you drive? What are the other options? So when I used to travel with my mom, when she got in the car, she was trying to panic and get out of the car and put her hands on the windows. And I was really surprised by it. So we need to take more time to understand that, because now I am a bit more enlightened, but when I was a natural caregiver, I should have taken more time to understand the limits of my mom. I think I pushed her too hard. I think I wanted her to do stuff, and when you do that, that's when unfortunate situations may happen. Is anybody else willing to share some practical insights or practical information, tips and tricks, if you will? I'm quite spoiled in my region because we have suburban trains, so you can try them out with the person with a neurocognitive disorder. So why would a person be nervous about not being able to get on the plane? So you have to understand the reasons for that. You have to make sure that you're able to take your luggage and keep your luggage. I think it's important to contact your Alzheimer's Society, because maybe you can have that conversation beforehand. You can't provide a one-size-fits-all solution. It depends on the reasons given by the person. Oh, I don't want to leave the province. I don't want to stay home. I need to go there, but I need to wait for a plane. So for more advanced cases, it's important to be able to be reassuring, to tell the person that everything's okay. No one will ever be reassured by being told to keep their calm. So it's important that staff be trained to answer the questions that the person with a neurocognitive disorder might have. What's difficult is that those things happen in the moment, and sometimes the cognitive system can be strained, and we don't necessarily know what triggers that, what overstimulates, and what triggers an emotional response. Sometimes it's the visual aspect, too much noise, too many people. So if you've known someone for a long time, you can have a good idea of the various triggers. But for someone who's right after the onset of the disease, it's hard to know what your triggers are. You arrive at the airport and you feel overwhelmed, and there's negative reactions happening. So what needs to be done is to prevent it from getting worse. So that's why you need to have a resource person that you can contact, that you can call on the phone, that you can identify, whether it be staff, a friend you can reach on the phone, or a resource person, a professional, to de-escalate the situation. I think that's quite important, and that would be very helpful for the person to go through the situation. Sometimes it's hard to predict because you're not expecting any issues to arise, but when you know someone for a long time, it's easier to identify the potential issues that may arise. So it's important to de-escalate situations, especially on a plane. Guylaine, would you have one last thing to add? I fully agree with what was said. I think it's an important decision to be made to travel with a person with neurocognitive disorders. So you need to be ready, you need to be prepared. But I think you need to adapt. You need to go at the pace of the person. Everybody has their limits. So if I want to travel with someone on a plane, for sure there's going to be anxiety in that person and I'm going to have to deal with it. So it's unavoidable. Unless you use medication, which is something we don't want. So the person will need to feel secure, to feel comfortable. Is there a language barrier? Does the person understand English, for example? All of those factors put together will trigger an emotion. And oftentimes we have to, we as natural caregivers have to deal with emotions to stabilize the person. If the person is angry, emotional, frustrated. So when Claire said that her mom panicked when she got on the car, that's because her emotional state told her that she was uncomfortable, she didn't know what was going to happen. So that's why it's very important to consult with Alzheimer Society organizations that can provide information and provide the proper tools. I think it's also very important to talk about it with people around you because family is a safety net, just like friends. So if you want to travel with someone with a neurocognitive disorder, you have to be expecting situations and behaviors that you'll have to de-escalate. This will require a certain level of cooperation from the person with the neurocognitive disorder, so it's something that needs to be discussed with the person. And I think it's very complicated to try to want to do a lot of things, but I think you have to be well aware of the limits of the person that you're dealing with. I really liked what Claire said. So this person has limits, but the person also has a lot of abilities. So you have to capitalize on those abilities. If the person still likes to travel, still likes to go to hop on a car, people with neurocognitive disorders are very comfortable in a car or on a bus or on a train or on a plane. But we need to respect those limits and also give us the opportunity for the experience to be positive. Is that because you want it or because the person that you're traveling with wants it? I think that's a beautiful conclusion. I know there are other very interesting questions in the chat box. We are out of time, but the Dementia Talk team will follow up with you. If you send us your questions, we will be pleased to answer them. I would like to thank again our panelists, and I will also thank all participants. So for your information, the recording will be available on the YouTube channel of Alzheimer Society of Canada. If you're registered, you'll receive an email about this when it's put online. And we encourage you to join us at our next session on January 17th at noon Eastern Time for a discussion about biomarkers, another very important subject. For more information, please visit alzheimer.ca/biomarkertalk. Finally, if you have any comments or questions about this discussion, please do not hesitate to send them to publications@alzheimer.ca. I think the address will also be provided on the discussion channel or in the chat, so you can send your feedback. And we thank you again for your participation, and we wish you a beautiful day. Thank you.